Welcome to the Master Your Millions podcast, the show all about your financial potential and leaving a legacy for future generations. Here are your hosts, Jason and Scott Henderson.
Welcome back, everyone. We're excited to have you here today. My name is Scott Henderson, and I am your host. My co-host is Dr. J, and we're experienced investors with a huge advantage of over 100 years of wisdom and experience in investing. Today, we've got someone extremely special. He's a mentor of mine. I've met him and been working with him and invested with him for years now. His name is Marlon Mueller. Marlon's he's in an interesting position and spot. He's a fourth generation of farmers, so he naturally comes from a background of thinking long term. And that often helps significantly when you invest. It's not about that short period of time that we're trying to get wealthy right now. We're looking to do this for generations. Anything else you'd add, Jason?
Well, I want to echo what you said. Marlon is a really good guy. We've both known him now for a few years, and he's been a mentor to you, and I have appreciated his wisdom. He's very level-headed. He's a down-to-earth kind of guy. Like you said, he's a fourth-generation farmer that lives in Iowa, right in the breadbasket of the United States, and he has a very interesting story, and the story we want to discuss with him is his story, and we want our listeners to understand that everybody needs an estate plan. As when we're thinking long term, you need an estate plan for the fact that you want to be in control of your money as you build it, once you have it, and then also have the ability to decide who will get that wealth, whether that's a charity or your posterity or whoever that is. Let's be clear, everyone has an estate plan. It's either the one you put together or the government's. And when you fail to plan, the estate plan that's in place is not the one that you want. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about Marlon. We're going to step back simple for a minute and let you tell our audience your experience with what happens when someone dies without a will and a trust.
Yeah, very good. I'm very happy to be here and love to share my story. And there's actually multiple stories, because when you're dealing with farm families, it's a whole different playground because of the ties with the land. And so my story on this one particular incident started in 1950, and my great-grandfather dies and they can't find his will. And it came up missing. And because they couldn't find the will, then it goes into what's called intestate. And the state of Iowa had a plan. And that plan was not the plan my great-grandfather had. And so there was 4 siblings and a mother. And so the plan was divided. So the mother got 1/3 and each of the siblings got 1/6 of that large farm. And then began the fighting. So when I was a young man, my grandfather used to always be talking about his brother-in-laws and what they were trying to do. And I thought it was from the 1950s, but it wasn't until I was in the 1980s, I actually got sued, part of the lawsuit. So it was like 34 years later, we finally settled one of the last siblings. And it was just a crazy deal. So here I was in my 20s going, oh my gosh, I can't do this again. We got to figure this thing out. But it wasn't that easy, because most estate plans were just around a will. But I also knew wills alone aren't necessarily the best vehicle, because they can get sued and reversed and stuff like that. So today I'm an advocate of not only having will, but also having trust and play. And I even have stories behind how that's protected us as a trust. So
Tell us one of those stories about how a trust has protected you. If you don't mind, maybe it's too personal, but I'm hoping that you could share something.
Well, I don't want to say too much, but let's just put it this way. With a trust, I was actually, sometimes you get siblings that don't necessarily agree, and especially when one of the parents dies. And a lot of times it's the dad that dies first. And the dad is kind of the rock to the family. And the mother relies on the dad as the rock too. And then they get kind of scared. And so whoever the sibling is, and I saw this in one of my extended family members, where whoever had the mom, whichever sibling, they were changing the will or trying to influence her. And with a trust, when one of the parents dies, then some become irrevocable if it's set up that way. So they can't really change too much of it. And that even helped a lot of families, and even my case too, so that I didn't have to worry about other siblings and families who are trying to make those changes. It was still being done based on what the parents had originally thought they wanted to have as their outcome. So that's to me, trusts are a valuable tool. And also, a lot of people think, oh, trusts are really, you need that for a lot of money. And I will say, probably not. I mean, if you're 100,000 or more, definitely you need a trust, because I actually, with the case of when my mother passed away, I had some stocks that weren't in the trust that I could have just pulled in. And because of some of the in-house fighting that was going on, I thought I'll just run that through probate, not that big a deal. But what happened was the cost to do just those few stocks was as much as it was to build the whole trust. And I thought, oh my goodness, I should have just pulled it in. So that's kind of what some of my experiences have been around trust and estate planning.
So walk us through for a minute when a will, everybody goes through probate. And a will get you in probate. Basically, this is a wish document telling the judge this is what you would like to have happened. However, it's not complete. The judge can still make changes or make his judgment, make his decision on what he thinks is best, or maybe even interprets what he thinks the deceased member wanted to have happen. Where a trust is a secondary document showing, okay, here in the will, this was my wish document. The trust is proving that it has taken place, and essentially takes the judge out of the equation. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I'll give you an example. So she was even our lawyer for doing some of our real estate deals, but I don't know, she never closed her dad's estate because I know why, but I'm not going to say, but so that had to be closed when she died. And then her estate, she had it set up that they had a business building in town, and she wanted to become like a museum because it never been remodeled. And then she wanted her house as a museum, and she had money set aside for it to run it. But because it was just a will and she didn't really have it built into a trust, her executor, which wasn't a family member because she didn't have any children or anything like that, they decided, no, that wasn't a good idea for that building and that home. And so all of it got sold off and the money got distributed to the executor. So how good are wills? Like you said, they can be changed. Where a trust, like in the case, you can, once it becomes irrevocable, unless you have what's called a trust protector in there, you can't change it. It is set in stone, and you follow that procedures as it's outlined in your trust. And so that's the beauty of a trust over a will.
And so the trust, you're saying, then up until the death of one of the partners, say it's a marriage, has the ability to be changed, maybe another grandchild is born, or there's a divorce in the family or something. I don't know what it is. There's the ability to change. However, when one of the spouses dies, it then becomes irrevocable, an entity that lives on essentially in perpetuity that can control and own assets.
And it depends on how the trust is written. I mean, they can write that in there. So like in my parents' trust, it pretty much when one died, the other one could make changes, but not, it was limited in what they could do on the changes, which is, when you think about that, especially as you age, and a lot of times that older person, they're clearly don't have that same thought process or clear-mindedness as maybe they did 10 years ago or 20 years ago when that document was originally built. So you don't want them relying on that fuzzy memory or fuzzy mindset to be making changes. So that's one of the reasons it's good to have a document that kind of does that. So when one spouse dies and the other one, as they age and their mind kind of isn't as clear minded in that sense, you don't want them to go, oh, I don't remember, because that happened to my mother. She couldn't remember why they did certain things and go, well, why did we do this? And that doesn't make sense to me. So it's a good clear path to have that in play.
Okay. So the trust, when you say a trust is not able to be sued, is that what you were saying earlier? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's a lot different than a will, because a will, like you said, it's just basically saying to the courts, this is what I want to happen. Where a trust is more or less a legal document in the sense of when it becomes irrevocable, that word is in itself explains it all. You can't make changes to it. And that's a very good thing in a lot of cases.
So talk to me, people that use trusts, what kind of advantages do they have over those that don't have trusts? And are trusts being used by wealthy families, not so wealthy families? Tell me a little bit what you know about that area.
Well, because I literally spent years studying trust, because I'll tell you, the first time I was trying to do something like that, there's a lot of crazy stuff out there, but they ended up going to jail. So I was like, oh, we got to figure this out better than I thought. So, and unfortunately, when I was in this process of trying to figure it all out over the years, I came across someone who was really good, and I learned a lot from him when we were building our trust. And so, to me, it's really about finding people that can help you build your trust, that think even beyond just that next generation. Like I wanted to create one that was multi-generational. And in fact, I didn't even, in my trust, nothing really gets distributed. And there's things you can put in there, like they have to have an income. Unless they're disabled, they literally have to have an income to live off before they can get income off the trust, so that you don't create trust babies down generational and stuff like that. The other thing is, like when my dad passed away, everything was owned in the trust. I literally didn't do anything. I didn't probate anything because there was nothing to probate. So, and literally when my mother died, I went into the banks, I signed the signature card, and I continued. Nothing stopped. I could continue writing the checks. In fact, I used the same checkbook. And that was so great, because if it was an estate, everything gets closed, the accounts get stopped, you got to get approval to become the executor, to go into the banks to sign the signature card that now you're the executor of this estate. It's a long process. But with the trust, it literally, I went that day, signed the signature card, nothing stopped. It just kept on smoothly moving forward.
So the trust almost sounds like an immortal being.
It is.
I don't want to, it sounds sacrilegious there. However, it is an entity that lives beyond the lifespan of everybody that's living right now. And it's a mechanism, if you will, to control things yet not own them.
Right.
So when your dad had this trust, let's say and he had put all his assets inside that trust, and he got into some sort of accident and he harmed someone else. There really wasn't a whole lot for someone to come after your dad for that accident, for the fact that he really didn't own much.
Well,
the trust on him. Am I
unless
speaking
it becomes
correctly?
irrevocable, when you have a revocable trust, it really doesn't have any asset protection per se. But it does when it becomes irrevocable. So some people, if they really want asset protection, then you got to kind of get that irrevocable trust set up. But what it does is, like in the case of if you're going into senior housing and stuff like that, I've had friend that his wife was in the senior home for 6 or 7 years. He literally, because of the cost, the senior housing literally took all his money. I think he could keep like 2,000 was all he had for a balance in his account. He owns his car. He doesn't own his home, but he can live in it as long as he is there. But if he moves, the senior home gets his home. So, but in the case when my father was in the senior housing and I was looking at that, he didn't live, that we had to utilize this. But when I was checking into it, because they had a trust and it had been in play for more than 6 years, that would be counted against them as an asset. So that's
your
a huge thing.
your 35-year journey has been largely to learn about and overcome some shortcomings in some family issues. What would you say to our audience how to go about putting together a will and a trust, and what would they do? When would they need to do it? Who's the type of person to talk to, from your experience?
Well, that's a really an interesting question. I don't know if I have the best answer for that. But ideally, you go to people that are, I guess so I'd say it this way: go to people who are kind of wealthy and go, who do you use? And ask around, and then go interview the lawyers. And most of them won't really give you like a template of this is what I do. But a lot of times, every once in a while, you'll get one that'll give you a template so you can see it. And I like to see what they're putting into play, because a lot of lawyers use the same kind of a template, but some will actually expand upon it and make it even better. But again, unless you have done what I've done and spend a lot of time studying all that stuff, you don't really know what is the difference between the two. So then you're relying on other people who have maybe put it in play and gone to, higher quality lawyers, or someone like you that, you've been studying this stuff and you kind of know what to do, and they can come to you too. So, and as far as who needs it, it's like my kids. I mean, they don't have a lot of assets, but they have some. And, with your program, it's fairly reasonable to set up trust. It's like, why would you even mess around? I mean, you build a will inside the trust. That's part of the document, but why have just a will? You can have a trust, you can have your power of attorney for finance, power of attorney for health, which anybody that's 18 and older need to have in play. A lot of people forget that because they're like, oh, my son's in the hospital, I'll help him out. But unless you have that in play, you can't make any decisions. You have to actually go through a court. So I just tell everyone, if they're 18 and older, put all that into play.
One of the cool things that I would have heard you say is that over this time you have learned all these different things. And when you have a trust that's a non-irrevocable, like we've talked about, that's between, say, it's your own or a married couple or something, those trusts have the ability to be changed, since the trust documents and the instructions can be updated. And so you can do that on, a periodic basis, which I'm assuming you would recommend as people. Maybe you run into a new neighbor or something, they tell you what's in their trust documents. Oh, that's good. How do I incorporate that in mine? And so that's something that you need to be regularly reviewing your trust documents and how to tweak it to make it better. So I like what you're saying, to talk to those that have them, talk to those that are wealthy, talk around and see what's out there. I really like that idea.
Well, here's another thought too, that so when I was actually building mine, I went to a fraternity brother of mine, and I knew he had used a law firm, and I was asking him what he used, and I said, well, so when I actually got trust done by them that I could review, and I was asking my fraternity brother, well, does yours say this or does it say that? He goes, well, I don't know. He had got, and this happens to almost everyone when I talk to, they get a trust, they go, phew, I got that done. It's on a shelf, and they never look at it again. And the problem is they bought different properties since then. Maybe they set up an entity structure, because all my entity structures are held under my holding company entity structure, which is held by my trust. So my trust is an umbrella to everything. And but then the thing is, if you don't add the things that you add into your estate plan and put it inside the trust, when you die, it's not in the trust. Then it'll have to be pulled in at a later time, which basically you're going through probate courts to get it pulled into your trust. So you're always wanting to, what we call, amend your trust. And the other thing, I was reviewing a trust for a friend of a friend, and when their dad built the trust, the estate plan was done properly based on the federal rules at that time. Of course, we know in 2017, a lot of those estate planning federal rules were changed. And because the trust wasn't updated, they actually had really kind of issues with estate taxes. And it was a large, huge estate plan with apartment complexes and everything else. And the way it was designed originally worked for what was at that time the rules. But rules change, as we all know. And so again, always reviewing your estate plan and your trust with your lawyers whenever there's rule changes or whenever you're adding assets to your portfolio.
So we've used the word probate a few times, and I want our listeners to sort of get this in their mind. Probate equals expense.
Right.
Probate equals loss of wealth in a big way. So when we are learning to master our millions, whether we're in the accumulation phase, the enjoyment phase, or passing it on to the next generation, we always want to avoid as much expense or loss of capital as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one area where, when it goes from generation to generation, that we put the next generation at a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
A whole life's work, to some degree, can go up in smoke when there isn't proper executed will and trust documents that are updated, as you've eloquently said. There can be such a huge expense that the next generation essentially is taking several steps backwards from your whole life's work. So it's crucial that it happens today. You need a will and trust today, not wait till next week, whatever. And like you said, when you can find someone that does it fairly reasonable, it needs to happen. And talk to me a little bit about how often you review your trusts.
Well, let me just say something about probate that I think is really critical too. Not only do you skip the cost of probate, but also the public notice. I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but when your probation goes through the court system, everything that you own that's in your will and how it is distributed is in the court records, at the county records. And
in other words, everybody can find that out.
yeah, and there are people that scour those things. So like if you inherit a house or two, and a lot of times siblings don't know what to do with the house, or they're not educated in what the house really worth. There are people literally that scour that and will approach those people and say, hey, I'll buy your house for you and stuff like that. But not only that, but I can actually, from the 1950 estate, because it was an estate for so long, there is every record. They had to keep every record of what was produced off the farm. So, they had, back then they had eggs they were selling, they had cattle they were selling. All that is in records in the courthouse. So it doesn't matter when, it's always going to be there. It's a forever record. So like when my dad, nobody knows what he owned. There's no record, zero. Because everything was in the trust. So as far as they know, he didn't own anything, which he didn't, technically.
And I suspect some of the very wealthy families in America are utilizing these entities to help pass generational money from one generation to the next.
Absolutely. They're using their trusts. They're using irrevocable and revocable trusts. They're using life insurance to transfer tons of generational wealth. That's how they're doing it.
Cool. Scott, you have any questions?
Nope. I'm pretty good. I'm young. I don't think about death.
Well, so, for me, because of, being a generational farmer, and I kind of, my kids aren't going to farm. I mean, we aren't in the farming. I've kind of backed out of that. So I look at it as like, okay, what am I doing to create that family generational wealth? And what am I looking at? So for me, kids each have their own thing that they want to do, but I'm also been teaching them how to think, generational, and how to create this wealth. And here's something I learned from being around family farms. So sometimes it may have taken 2 generations to build up this family farm wealth. And so say there's $2 million, just to give you an example, and there's 4 siblings. And so they each get $500,000. In today's environment, you can blow through $200,000-300,000 in a year and wonder, where did that money go? So what took 2 generations to build up, siblings can lose it in a year or 2. And then not only that, but what does $500,000 compared to $2 million do as far as value in getting loans or using that money as far as buying into other asset classes and stuff like that? It has a lot more power. So that's why when I look at with my trust, I don't want it just to be distributed and lose that power, because there's power in holding that money together and teaching that next generation. And I think a lot of times I see this too. Parents always go, well, I want to make it equal to everyone. But from a biblical perspective, it never says that everyone gets it equally. I mean, you think of the talents. The person that had the 10 talents versus the person that had the 5 talents versus the person that had the 1 talent. And the 1 talent person was afraid and just hid the money and then making the money off it. And what did the ruler say? He said, you wicked slave. Who's he give it to? He doesn't give it to the guy with the 5 talents. He gives it to the guy with the 10 talents, because he knew how to really multiply the money. He had a lot more to deal with. I look at that as like, okay, why are we giving money to a sibling that doesn't know how to handle money? How will it ruin them? How will it change that family? I've seen that in another side of my family, where my great uncle or great grandfather was super wealthy. His son inherited that money at 29, and he only lived 15 more years. He became an alcoholic, overweight, never worked, spent through all the money.
Wow.
So I always tell people, if you don't train that next generation how to handle your wealth, you're probably better off to give it to charity or ministries than to ruin 2 generations.
I like that. Good advice. So, Scott, you said a minute ago that I don't think about death. I don't know this. That's where a lot of people often are. You don't need a will and trust until you need a will and trust to some degree, right? And when you need that will and trust, it's too late. And so it's one of these things that we need to put the I's and cross all the T's and put in some protection for ourselves. You mentioned, Marlon, life insurance a minute ago. A life insurance contract is a trust. Mm-hmm. There's a grantor, there's a trustee, and there's a beneficiary. That's why life insurance is such a go-to entity as well, to pass on generational wealth and to create wealth during our lifetime, in the event you understand how to use that contract during your lifetime. Marlon, it's been awesome to have you on. We really appreciate your wisdom. And I mean, someone who's been through such a huge experience like this, when someone listens to this, in the event they are not motivated to go out there and get it done, I'm not sure what will.
Yeah, a lot of people are like that. And I wasn't always had everything in line too. It's just been a process. But I think once you have kids, it's really a necessity to have something in play, like who's going to take care of the kids and all that kind of stuff. Because if you don't, then the courts are going to decide for you.
And I'll say as well, like, it comes down to looking not only just long term, but setting yourself up to be able to look long term. This is the foundation where you need to have a rock to stand on, not something just wishy-washy, but something to come back and this is how it is. I need to plan accordingly. And so it provides a lot of guidance as you go to invest, what investments to make, how to structure those investments. So it does affect every single aspect. And even though while I'm young, I still personally have a trust. I still personally have a will and things like that written out. And so again, Marlon, thank you. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
So I want to just say one more thing, because of all the things I've been through and people I kind of read and learn from too. Another great big thing I think that needs to be done that's not done is, if you have an estate plan and you have adult children, share. And I'll give you an example. So one of the guys that I know, he works with families, not as a lawyer, but as an advocate or a helper that way. So he had 2 examples he was sharing. He goes, he's got one family, both of them wealthy families, both of them multiple siblings, the mother's still alive. One family's coming in to get their will read. They know nothing. They don't know who's going to get what. They don't know why, Jim's getting the farm and Susie doesn't. And there's going to be fighting. And then the other one example is, everyone already knows what's happening. They know why Jim's getting a farm, because he was helping his dad and etc. And this is why we're doing that. But we're also doing this for Susie because, they use life insurance and stuff like that to give her assets to have in her estate, from their estate. So which do you think was a better scenario? Sharing that. So many times, my generation, their parents, our parents are dying off and they don't know anything what's going on. They don't even know where all the assets are. They don't even know where the, who's in charge of this property or that property, or if it's been rented out, or where are the contracts. I mean, all that stuff needs to be shared. So, and if you have that, share, not only share that, but it's share why you're doing it. And so the next generation knows and learns so that they can continue generationally creating this wealth.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us. If you'd like to connect with us, hit us up on our Facebook group, Instagram, Twitter, or shoot us an email. All the links are in the show notes down below. Again, remember, mastering your millions all starts with your mind and your team. Make sure they're the best. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Millions with Jason and Scott Henderson. Check the show notes for any links or contact information about today's guest. Make sure to follow the show so you don't miss any future episodes.